Imagine an empire so powerful that it managed to challenge Rome, the greatest superpower of antiquity. An empire that controlled valuable trade routes, such as the famous Silk Road, and that had warriors so skilled that they could defeat much larger armies. Such an empire existed, and its name was the Parthian Empire. But here's the secret. Behind all this glory, there was a history full of intrigue, epic battles, and twists and turns that not even the best Hollywood screenwriters could invent. And the most impressive thing, this empire, which seemed invincible, ended up falling in a way that no one could have foreseen. Have you ever stopped to think about what it would be like to face an army of mounted archers capable of firing arrows while riding at full speed? Or what it would be like to see your troops surrounded and annihilated in a scorching desert? Well, the Parthians didn't just imagine it, they made it happen. And Rome, which was used to winning, discovered firsthand what it was like to face a truly formidable enemy. But what if I told you that, despite all their power and strategy, the Parthians also made mistakes that led to their downfall? Mistakes that can teach us valuable lessons even today. So, get ready, because we're about to embark on a journey through time where you'll discover how the Parthian Empire came to be, how it became Rome's greatest enemy, and finally how it all came to an end. And be careful, this story is so captivating that you might end up feeling like you're in the middle of the battlefield, feeling the desert dust and the heat of the sun as the armies collide. Come on, are you ready? Then press play and come with me to discover the secrets of the Parthian Empire, the rise and fall of Rome's greatest enemy. If you're not yet subscribed to the channel, take advantage now to be part of our community. Every interaction you make makes this space more special. In the heart of Central Asia, where the hot desert winds blew over vast plains and imposing mountains, a people destined to change the course of history was born: the Parthians. They were nomads, hunters and warriors, shaped by an arid and unforgiving land. Their calloused hands knew the weight of weapons, and their eyes, accustomed to sandstorms, reflected the cunning of those who had learned to survive in the most hostile environments. The Parthians were descendants of the ancient Achaemenid Empire and heirs to a warrior tradition that valued strength and cunning. Their rise began at a crucial moment. The Seleucid Empire, successor to the vast domain of Alexander the Great, was weakened by internal disputes and external challenges. It was a rare opportunity, and the Parthians, led by visionaries, were ready to seize it. Among them, Arsaces I stood out as a military genius and a charismatic leader. He not only commanded armies, but inspired loyalty, making each warrior fight as if his own destiny were at stake. The key to the Parthians' success lay in their ability to adapt. While other empires relied on massive armies and conventional tactics, the Parthians developed an innovative style of warfare based on mobility and cunning. Their army consisted of agile horsemen and mounted archers who could fire arrows with deadly accuracy while retreating, a tactic that disconcerted heavier foes such as the Seleucids, who still relied on the rigidity of the Greek phalanxes. Imagine the scene. Dust rises across the battlefield as Seleucid ranks march forward with raised lances. On the other side, the Parthians mount their swift horses, eyes alert, hands steady on their bows. In the blink of an eye, they unleash a volley of arrows and retreat, tricking the enemy into advancing. But it is a trap. The Seleucids confidently pursue the mounted archers, only to be surrounded by a second wave of horsemen who pelt them with lances and curved swords. When the dust settles, victory is Parthian. The Battle of Ecbatana marks a turning point. The Parthians conquer territory and establish their capital at Nisa, a strategic location for controlling trade routes. And speaking of trade, the Parthians had a knack for business. The Silk Road, the most important connection between East and West, passed directly through their territories. By taking control of it, the Parthians not only grew rich, but also became indispensable intermediaries between Rome, China, and India. Caravans crossed deserts and mountains, carrying silk, spices, jewels, and ideas. For the Parthians, trade was not just a matter of wealth, it was a form of power. They learned to influence nations without lifting a sword, using gold and diplomacy as their sharpest weapons. But their rise was not based solely on war and trade. The Parthians were also masters in the art of diplomacy. Rather than simply conquering territories and imposing their culture, they often established alliances and integrated local elements into their government. In Mesopotamia, for example, they adopted Babylonian administrative practices, respecting the religious and political traditions of the region. This ensured loyalty and stability, allowing them to rule vast regions without having to constantly resort to force. And there was something else. The Parthians were masters at manipulating the perception of their enemies. They created an aura of mystery and sophistication around their empire. Even the Romans, known for their arrogance, viewed them with a mixture of respect and awe. When Parthian ambassadors arrived in Rome, they would be draped in luxurious fabrics, bearing exotic gifts and telling stories of faraway lands. This was not just politics, it was a psychological strategy. By presenting themselves as enigmatic and powerful, the Parthians ensured that their enemies would think twice before attacking them. Now imagine living in that time. What would you feel if you saw a Parthian caravan pass through your city? The well-trained horses, the proud archers, the merchants offering rare spices and never-before-seen fabrics. Hear the whispers of an empire that stretched from the mountains of Iran to the banks of the Euphrates. Feel the chills run down your spine as you listen to a Roman veteran tell of the terrible defeat suffered by the Parthians, of arrows that seemed to come from the wind itself, and an army that would never allow itself to be captured. The Parthians didn't just build an empire, they created a legend, but that legend was about to be challenged by a new enemy, Rome. But that's a story for the next chapter. In the meantime, think about it. How did a nomadic people manage to maintain such a vast empire surrounded by powerful enemies? Was it just military force, or was there something more? Leave your opinion in the comments, and let's discuss this intriguing question together. After all, history is not just something we read, it is something we live and interpret. And you, as a viewer, have a fundamental role in this journey. Get ready, because in the next part, we will explore how the Parthian Empire established itself as a power, facing internal and external challenges. You won't want to miss it. If the rise of the Parthians was marked by boldness and strategy, their consolidation as an empire was a true example of vision and planning. And at the heart of this phase was a name that would echo through the centuries: Mithridates I, also known as Mithridates the Great. Under his rule, the Parthian Empire not only expanded its borders, but also laid the foundations for one of the most enduring and influential empires of antiquity. Mithridates I assumed the throne at a crucial moment. The already weakened Seleucid Empire still maintained control over strategic regions such as Mesopotamia and Persia. But Mithridates was no ordinary leader. He had a clear vision: to transform the Parthians into an undisputed power. And to do this, he knew that he needed more than military victories. He needed efficient administration and solid alliances. His first great conquest was the capture of Mesopotamia, a rich and culturally diverse region. But rather than impose his rule by brute force, Mithridates took a clever approach. He respected local traditions, allowing city-states to maintain a degree of autonomy as long as they acknowledged Parthian authority. This policy of tolerance not only prevented revolts, but also ensured the loyalty of local populations. Just imagine a city like Seleucia, one of the largest urban centers of the time, continued to thrive under Parthian rule, its markets brimming with goods from all over the known world. But Mithridates' true genius lay in his ability to integrate different cultures under a single empire. He not only allowed Greeks, Persians, Babylonians, and other peoples to maintain their traditions, but also encouraged the exchange of ideas and knowledge. It was during his reign that Parthian art and architecture flourished, creating a unique synthesis that reflected the diversity of the empire. For example, Parthian palaces combined Greek elements, such as columns and statues, with Persian motifs such as intricate reliefs and lush gardens. And we cannot talk about Parthian expansion without mentioning their military conquests. Mithridates led brilliant campaigns, expanding the empire eastwards into Bactria and westwards into Armenia. His victory over the Greco-Bactrian king Eucratides was particularly significant, as it secured control over vital trade routes that linked Central Asia to India. And here's a fascinating detail. The Parthians didn't just conquer territory, they also assimilated the best practices of their enemies. For example, they adopted and adapted the heavy cavalry of the Greco-Bactrians, creating an even more formidable military force. However, expansion was not just a matter of conquest. Mithridates also invested heavily in the empire's infrastructure. Roads were built to facilitate trade and troop movements, while fortified cities ensured border security. And speaking of trade, the Parthians knew how to make the most of their geographical position. The Silk Road, already vital, became even more important under their control. Parthian caravans transported not only goods, but also ideas, religions, and technologies, connecting East and West in ways that would shape the world for centuries. But it wasn't all sunshine and roses. Expansion brought challenges, especially when it came to managing such a vast and diverse empire. Mithridates faced internal revolts and power struggles, but his political and military skill always prevailed. He understood that an empire is not built with swords alone, but also with diplomacy and long-term vision. Now imagine living in that time. What would it be like to witness the transformation of a relatively small kingdom into an empire that stretched from the Caspian Sea to the Persian Gulf? What would it be like to see the Parthian caravans crossing the desert, carrying treasures from distant lands? And what do you think was the most important factor in Mithridates' success? His military conquests, his diplomatic skill, or his strategic vision? This is a question that does not have an easy answer, and that is why the history of the Parthians is so fascinating. And you, as a viewer, have the opportunity to reflect on these questions and share your ideas. After all, history is not just a collection of facts, it is a conversation that spans time. And your voice is part of that conversation. So stay tuned, because the next part will reveal how the Parthian Empire faced its greatest challenge, the rise of Rome. How did these two giants collide, and what were the consequences for the ancient world? You won't want to miss this epic journey. Have you found this interesting so far? Leave a like to let me know you enjoy this type of content. As the Parthian Empire consolidated its power in the east, a new force was emerging in the west: Rome. The Roman Republic, with its disciplined legions and expansionist ambitions, would soon become the greatest challenge for the Parthians. This rivalry was not just a series of military conflicts, it was a clash of cultures, strategies, and worldviews that would shape the destiny of two of the greatest powers of antiquity. It all started with Armenia, a strategic region located between the two empires. Rich in resources and with a privileged geographical location, Armenia was coveted by both sides. For the Parthians, controlling Armenia meant securing a buffer zone against possible Roman invasions. For the Romans, it was the key to expanding their influence in the east. And so, Armenia became the scene of a dispute that would last for centuries. The first major confrontation between Rome and the Parthian Empire occurred during the reign of Mithridates II, one of the greatest Parthian leaders. He not only maintained the conquests of his predecessors, but also established a shrewd foreign policy, seeking alliances with neighboring kingdoms in order to isolate Rome. However, the Romans, led by ambitious generals such as Lucullus and Pompey, were unwilling to give in. The Mithridatic War, which initially involved the kingdom of Pontus, eventually drew the Parthians and Romans into an indirect conflict. But it was during the reign of Orodes II that the rivalry reached its peak. Orodes was a shrewd and ruthless leader, and he knew that confronting Rome directly would be a mistake. Instead, he opted for a strategy of attrition, using his light cavalry and mounted archers to attack Roman supply lines and avoid direct confrontation. This tactic, known as guerrilla warfare, was extremely effective against the Roman legions, which were accustomed to frontal battles. One of the most iconic moments of this rivalry was the crisis involving the Roman general Crassus. Seduced by the promise of riches and glory, Crassus led an invasion of Parthian territory in 53 BC, ignoring the warnings of his allies about the strength and skill of the Parthians. The result was disastrous. At the Battle of Carrhae, the Roman legions were surrounded and annihilated by Parthian mounted archers, who used a devastating technique, the Parthian shot, in which the archers feigned a retreat and then turned and fired arrows at their pursuers. Crassus was killed, and the legionary eagles, symbols of Roman military pride, were captured. This humiliating defeat left a deep scar on Rome and elevated the Parthians to the status of formidable enemies. However, the rivalry was not limited to the battlefield. There was also a war of propaganda and influence. The Parthians, for example, often supported anti-Roman factions in neighboring kingdoms such as Armenia and Judea in order to undermine Rome's influence. On the other hand, the Romans sought allies among disaffected Parthian nobles, promising support in exchange for loyalty. This dynamic created a geopolitical chess game where every move could alter the balance of power. And here's a fascinating fact. Despite the rivalry, there were moments of cooperation between the Parthians and the Romans. In 20 BCE, for example, Emperor Augustus negotiated the return of the legionary eagles captured at Carrhae in exchange for territorial concessions and a peace treaty. This agreement, although temporary, showed that even the greatest enemies could find common ground when convenient. Now, imagine living in that era. What would it be like to witness the clash between these two superpowers? How would you feel if you saw the Roman legions marching towards Parthian territory? Or if you heard the stories of the mounted archers who challenged the might of Rome? And what do you think was the decisive factor in this rivalry? Military strategy, diplomacy, or the ability to adapt? This is a question that does not have a simple answer, and that is why the history of Rome and the Parthian Empire is so captivating. And you, as a viewer, have the opportunity to reflect on these questions and share your ideas. After all, history is not just something we study, it is something we live and interpret, and your perspective is a fundamental part of this narrative. So get ready, because the next part will reveal one of the most dramatic moments of this rivalry, the Battle of Carrhae. How did the Parthians manage to defeat one of the greatest military powers of antiquity? And what were the consequences of this victory? You will not want to miss this incredible story. The Battle of Carrhae was not just a military confrontation. It was a clash of strategies, cultures, and ambitions that defined the course of history. In 53 BCE, Roman general Marcus Licinius Crassus, one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in Rome, decided it was time to expand Roman rule eastward into Parthian territory. Driven by greed and a desire for glory, Crassus underestimated his enemy and paid the ultimate price. Crassus was not a seasoned military man like Julius Caesar or Pompey. His fame came from his wealth and political influence, but he yearned for conquests that would put him on the same level as his fellow triumvirs. When he set out for Parthia at the head of 7 legions, some 40,000 men, He was confident that victory would be quick and easy. After all, Rome had defeated powerful empires before. What could possibly go wrong? Everything. The Parthians, led by their general Surena, were prepared. They knew the harsh and hostile terrain of the Mesopotamian desert where the battle would take place. While the Romans marched under the scorching sun, carrying heavy armor and equipment, the Parthians used their superior mobility to wear down the enemy. The Parthian cavalry, made up of mounted archers and cataphracts, heavy cavalry, was a lethal and versatile force. Surena's tactics were brilliant. He avoided direct confrontation, opting instead for quick and stealthy attacks. The Parthian mounted archers surrounded the Roman legions, unleashing a hail of arrows that caused havoc. When the Romans tried to advance, the Parthians retreated, keeping their distance and continuing to attack. It was a war of attrition, and the Romans, accustomed to frontal battles, were unprepared for this. Crassus, in desperation, ordered his son Publius to lead a charge against the Parthians. Publius, brave but reckless, advanced with a group of cavalry and light infantry. At first it seemed that the Romans were gaining the upper hand, but it was a trap. The Parthians lured Publius away from the main lines and surrounded him. The heroic charge ended in tragedy. Publius and his men were massacred. When Publius's head was brought to Crassus, the Roman general despaired. Dead and surrounded, Crassus tried to negotiate with Surena, but the Parthians were not interested in fair negotiations. During the encounter, Crassus was killed, and his troops, demoralized and exhausted, were annihilated. Of the 7 legions that set out for Parthia, only a fraction survived. The legionary eagles, symbols of Roman military pride, were captured and taken as trophies. The defeat at Carrhae was a shock to Rome. Never before had such a large Roman force been completely destroyed. The humiliation was so great that the Parthians reportedly used Crassus's head as a prop in a play, reenacting their defeat in a grotesque manner. This event marked the beginning of a new phase in the rivalry between Rome and the Parthian Empire, one marked by hatred and a desire for revenge. But the Battle of Carrhae also revealed something fascinating about the Parthians: their capacity for military innovation. They did not rely solely on superior numbers or equipment. They used clever and adaptive tactics, exploiting the enemy's weaknesses. And here's a little-known fact. The Parthians were masters of war psychology. Before battle, they would beat drums and cymbals, creating a deafening noise that disoriented the Romans. They also wore bright banners and colorful clothing to intimidate enemy soldiers. Carrhae was not just a military defeat for Rome. It was a reminder that war is not won by brute force alone, but by intelligence, strategy, and adaptation. The Parthians, with their mastery on the battlefield, showed the world that even the most powerful empires could be surprised. And perhaps this is the greatest lesson of history. The true strength of a civilization lies not only in its legions or armies, but in its ability to understand and adapt to the unknown. Is there anything that has struck you so far? Share it in the comments. Your insight is important. The Parthian Empire, which for centuries challenged Rome and ruled vast regions of Asia, did not disappear overnight, nor was it destroyed by a single event. Its fall was a long and complex process, the result of a combination of internal conflicts, external pressures, and the emergence of a new force that would change the balance of power in the East: the Seleucid Empire. To understand this decline, it is not enough to look only at the battles and military campaigns. It is necessary to delve into the political, social, and cultural structure that supported this great civilization. The first signs of fragility appeared within the Parthian aristocracy itself. The model of government was a decentralized monarchy in which the kings of the Seleucid dynasty depended on the support of a powerful warrior nobility. While the empire was rising, this structure allowed for flexibility and resilience, but as time went on, it became a burden. Disputes between aristocratic families for control of the throne created instability, resulting in betrayals, palace coups, and turbulent successions. The Parthian throne was often won more by political force than by dynastic legitimacy, and this weakened the cohesion of the empire. Meanwhile, Rome continued to press its borders. Although the Parthians had humbled the Romans at the Battle of Carrhae, this victory did not secure their supremacy. On the contrary, it further inflamed Rome's desire for revenge. Generals such as Mark Antony attempted to invade Parthian territory, and although their campaign failed, it was a harbinger of troubled times ahead. In the 2nd century, the emperors Trajan and Septimius Severus led devastating offensives, capturing strategic cities and further destabilizing the authority of the Parthian kings. Each new Roman campaign sapped the empire's resources and strained its ability to respond. But the final blow did not come from the west. It came from within Persia itself. In the early 3rd century, a new leader emerged, Ardashir I, a local ruler who claimed to be the rightful heir to the old Achaemenid Empire. To many Persians, the Parthians were foreign rulers, whose culture had become too mixed with Hellenistic and foreign influences. The Sassanids, on the other hand, presented themselves as restorers of authentic Persian traditions, promoting Zoroastrianism as the official religion and rejecting the decentralization of power. The decisive confrontation took place at the Battle of Hormozgan in 224 AD. Ardashir and his forces faced the last Parthian king, Artabanus IV. The battle was brutal, but the Sassanid army, more disciplined and united under a centralized command, achieved victory. Artabanus was killed, and with him collapsed an empire that had resisted for almost 500 years. However, Ardashir's victory did not erase Parthian influence. On the contrary, many elements of their culture and institutions were assimilated by the Sassanids. The fearsome cataphract cavalry, which had terrorized the Roman legions, was maintained and improved. Parthian diplomacy, which balanced strategic agreements with displays of force, continued to be used by the Sassanids in their relations with Rome. Even the ancient Parthian cities remained commercial and cultural centers, ensuring that their heritage was not forgotten. But beyond the military and political aspects, there is something deeply human about this transition of power. Imagine living in that time, watching the world around you change irreversibly. For the Parthian nobles, it was the end of an era and the collapse of a system they believed in. For ordinary citizens, it was a change of rulers, but not necessarily a routine one. After all, everyday life went on, and conflicts between empires, however grandiose, rarely touched all layers of society in the same way. The history of the Parthian Empire teaches us that no power is eternal, and that the strength of an empire lies not only in its armies or territories, but in the cohesion of its people, the stability of its institutions, and its ability to adapt to challenges. When this cohesion is lost, even the most formidable empires can crumble, and perhaps this is the greatest lesson that the fall of the Parthians has to offer us. In history, as in life, it is not only battles that define the fate of a civilization, but the choices made in times of crisis. And so we come to the end of the incredible journey of the Parthian Empire, an empire that challenged Rome, dominated strategic trade routes, and left a legacy that echoes to this day. But before we wrap up, stay tuned, because the story doesn't end here. What happened to the Sassanids? How did the legacy of the Parthians influence the ancient world and even our modern world? These are questions that we will answer in the next videos, so don't forget to subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss anything. Oh, and here's a challenge for you. If you were a Parthian leader, what would you do to prevent the decline of the empire? Leave your answer in the comments and let's discuss together. After all, history is not just a thing of the past. It is alive, and you are part of it. Until next time, and remember, the past is full of secrets waiting to be discovered. Let's continue this adventure together.